Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills, whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or your digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organization. Each and every episode, we sit down with leaders from various fields, just like you're grabbing a cup of coffee with them. We dive into real, practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, should leaders be active with digital media? I mean, who has the time anymore? There are so many different options when it comes to digital media. Is it really worth the effort? Should I pay someone to do it? I don't know what to post. Is it just about posting? Oh my goodness, there's so many options. And especially as senior leaders, will it help expand your influence? Will it help expand the culture of your company? We're going to answer so many of these questions in today's Speak with People podcast episode. There's far too many leaders, even senior leaders out there, who have virtually no digital presence. And hopefully through the end of this podcast, this conversation, we're going to convince you to hop in. Well, I'm thrilled to welcome Jess Jensen. She is founder of Copilot Communications. She works with leaders who are eager and driven to learn and to make a greater impact using digital tools. She's here to share her insights, why digital media is non-negotiable for senior leaders. I love that. She's a communication strategist, digital marketer, entrepreneur, just the absolute perfect guest to be on the Speak with People podcast. And get this, previous life before she started Copilot, she held leadership roles at Microsoft, Adidas, Nestle. Just incredible. Spent a decade at Qualcomm, led their company's worldwide digital marketing and communications practice. She gained deep insights. I love this. I've been looking forward to this episode for a long time. I appreciate all you do. Jess, welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Thank you so much. What a lovely intro.
Absolutely. Well, I love talking with people who nerd out and who love to get into the granular, when it comes to communications. And so this is fantastic. This is going to be great.
Absolutely. Can't wait. Let's jump in.
All right. Well, before we get to some of the questions, walk our listeners through a little bit more about you, who you are, what you do, what got you to this place as a leader, how you help other leaders.
For sure. As you did a great job already of explaining, I've got about 20 years of kind of the corporate side of my career. So being embedded in these marketing communications teams for pretty large enterprise, publicly traded companies, both on the consumer and the B2B side, which we can get to that later, but more and more of those things have all meshed together. But through that work, obviously I learned a lot about sort of building a corporate brand, and brand building in general. But more and more, the path of my career led me toward working one-on-one with, pretty senior leaders, right? VP up to CEO. And as digital tools became more and more paramount to any communication strategy, with the background that I had doing that at more of a brand level, it was a very natural segue to bring that practice into more of a kind of advisor role with these leaders. So I love that I get to do it now with clients and across different industries and different sizes of companies. And I think that while I think the stats are something like 65% now of CEOs have some sort of social presence at least. And that's,
Right.
There's other properties outside of social, but just they're at least there. So it's more than half, it's a majority, but there's still a tremendous amount of white space where folks are either, as you said, not sure what to do, they're inconsistent, perhaps it's not really their voice, it's a team behind them, or they're only in one space and they're not expanding in some of the other great territories like podcasting.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. I love that. Okay, well, let's go right in because, non-negotiable. So why is this digital communication no longer optional? Like, especially for leaders?
Yeah, number one, I think we all know and feel it. There's never going to be a replacement for human contact, and I fully believe that face to face and in real life presence is a fantastic part of how we relate, build relationships, and communicate with one another.
Yep.
However, there are so many digital properties and they are so prominent in everyday life for any business, any leader, right? And so, number one, we just need to make sure that we're there, right? We're there. We have at least a rudimentary understanding of what's happening and how they work. And then I think step two is how do we narrow down what are the platforms that feel the most germane to us?
Right.
So I'm a big believer in start where you're comfortable and really build that muscle, and then you can add on more over time. You're never going to come across as being your true self, authentic, and really just comfortable if you're pushing yourself into a space that doesn't feel right for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You probably don't need to start tomorrow with the TikTok dances if you haven't danced before.
Right. Totally.
So we say this phrase, digital media, digital communication. So often we think just Instagram or, just Twitter or whatever, but that's so much more than that. How would you define it? How would you kind of open up the scope of that for leaders?
Yeah, I mean, social in and of itself is a portfolio, right? Social is not a
Mm,
binary thing. So, you just threw out a couple of platforms from the start, but I mean, if you count it up, right, there's, almost a dozen different social platforms that people can spend time on, maybe 4 or 5 that are really concentrated and the most prominent. But there's new ones all the time. And we've probably heard now of Blue Sky, right? Sort of the latest to kind of come onto the
yep.
scene. And we'll see how much it grows and what happens next year in 25 with that. But social is a portfolio of tools. So there's sort of that bucket. And then choosing maybe one or two that, like I said, feel really comfortable for you and your business. Um, Podcasting is another one that I return to often, partly because I love podcasts myself. I listen to them all the time. As I'm going for walks in the afternoon or getting ready in the morning, I learn so much from podcasts. And I'm sure you agree, they're a wonderful complement where social is a bit more surface level, right? Like
Mm,
short attention span, but you
yep.
can hit a pretty broad range of viewers. So you've got that kind of breadth play with social. Podcasting really gives you that depth play. So it might be a smaller subset of folks that are actively or daily, weekly listening to podcasts, although that's growing all the time.
Right.
Um, but you get them for 10, 15, 20 minutes, which you would never get that attention in social. So I love those two as like my step one and step two.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I think about some of the companies now that are joining not that podcasting's a bandwagon, but for a while it just hasn't been, wasn't just seen as in the same category like you just talked. And so now more and more companies I'm finding have an external podcast, for the world. Here's a deep dive into Nestle. And then they actually have an internal podcast just for the
Mm.
culture of their employees. And so you think about, boy, I may never interact with the CEO or anybody on the C-suite, but boy, I love listening to them, talk about why they decided to do that or those kind of things. Walk us through some of the excuses that you hear from leaders, why they don't jump into any of this. And I'd love to, we'll see how they line up.
Yeah. One of them definitely is around the constriction of time.
Yep.
And I get it. I get it. I mean, even if you're early in your career, finding the time to come up with ideas. Let's just talk about social, and maybe we can incorporate things like blogging or maybe internal emails into this bucket as well, because they're all sort of written word, kind of longer form.
Yep.
So thinking about, am I shooting video? Am I writing copy? What's the image? What's even the strat? I mean, what am I even talking about this week, right? What are the themes? It's a lot of work. And then to do it consistently, week after week, month after month, um, I get it. Like time is of the essence. And especially as you rise up into that most senior level where you're looking after hundreds, if not thousands of employees, you're flying all over the world, perhaps to visit customers. It really has to be something that you enjoy, and you often have an accountability partner to sort of work with you and build it into your practice as part of how you communicate with all of your stakeholders.
Absolutely. So, I think about, if I'm a leader and I want to communicate my mission, the values, the things that are important to me, even little things. How can I use digital media to get out there and do that? What are some ways that I can be, creatively doing that so I can kind of spread it out?
For sure. And I mean, my brain I tend to be kind of a sort of a systems based thinker. So I love the
Mm.
idea of developing kind of a rubric or an architecture. So it's a great question. Some of the things that I've recommended over the years, one thing that comes to mind is publicly praising employees and
Wow.
or customers, right? Yeah. I mean,
Yep.
it's a currency, right? You can
Yep.
imagine if you're there's an example I think back, and I've used this a couple times in the first year in 2020 of the pandemic at Qualcomm, when we all went home as everyone did, or many of us did, who weren't frontline workers. And there was an engineer, a senior engineer who was a hardware engineer, and so actually had physical, besides just a computer, he actually had physical things he needed to work with. And so he went into the office. He took all of his stuff and rebuilt his entire lab and his garage. And so number one, he was incredibly efficient and like kept all of his deadlines, which was amazing. But number two, he took a photo of it and he sent it in to the comms team, and it made its way to the CEO. And our CEO was just like bowled over. We got to publish
Wow.
this. This is amazing. I am so impressed. No one told him to do this. He just did it because he thought it was the right thing to do.
Right.
And so I
Oh,
think, those little moments where you see a team come together, an employee group over delivers, exceeds expectations. Often the end of big events where there's just been such, blood, sweat, and tears put into pulling off a multi-day event. Those are moments where senior leaders can, without spending a dime, can really capture the heart of their employees and give them that public praise out loud.
well, I mean, we almost got to the gold too quick in the episode because this is so worthwhile, so valuable. You think about how company cultures could, turn the dial in positivity and in a healthy way if more leadership did that. I mean, I've seen so many different, research and stats on employees' health and longevity. And that comes up time and time again. I mean, even just someone recognized me. A lot of times they don't
Mm.
even need it broadcast to the world. It's just, wow, one person noticed. I mean, there's so many ways that you can do that to be able to, do it in powerful ways. I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. I think it's underutilized, and I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to recognize people out loud. Another area that I'll mention, just to your question around like how can they leverage digital platforms to even drive the business, is around using and especially social, and I would say also places like Reddit where you have a really active audience that are in these, obviously in these specific forums, is market research, right? Listening.
Mm.
And I'll give an example that's outside of the companies that I've worked for, but one of the leaders that I follow is Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb.
Mm.
And he does a great job of this. He's used X over the years to ask questions about features that should be added or changed in regard to how Airbnb both works with their hosts as well as with the guests.
Mm.
And what's great though is he won't just ask those questions and take that information and then you don't hear from him again. Months go by, but eventually some of those things make their way into the next wave of updates to the
Wow.
platform. And he'll come back and he'll say, you told me XYZ. And here we are 6 months later, and we did those things. So thank you so much. And here's the link to go check out what it looks like in real life.
Wow. Wow. Right. A great one. So, step back for a second. What if I'm the senior leader and I'm like, I just don't know what to say. Should I just say my thoughts? Should I is it helpful to get somebody to help me put a plan in place? Should I just go to ChatGPT and write in what should I say on you know on those kind of things? Walk us through some practical steps you'd give leaders.
Yeah, well, and thank you for the softball. So shameless plug. I definitely think you should have a partner in crime. So that's absolutely what I would love to be able to do and be of service to those leaders. Right, is to help build that framework we talked about earlier. What I shared were a couple of fun tactics, but ultimately, what you want to start with is, like you would with any program, is a strategy, a narrative strategy that would
Mhm.
incorporate your values just as a human and as a leader. They would incorporate, the business priorities of whatever company you're working for, product launches, key customers, key partnerships. Um, they might also incorporate things like how you envision the future of your industry. If you've really been in an industry for 10, 15, maybe 30 years, you've got a lot of history and you've seen cycles, and you're probably a deep technical expert in whatever that field might be. So my guess is you have hypotheses about where
Mm.
things might be in 3, 5, 10 years. Talk about that. Be a futurist, make some fun predictions. So those are just some examples of territories that you might pull together into a narrative platform. And then once you have that architecture, you want to pepper in, again, some personal anecdotes, because there's nothing worse than just someone sort of espousing the greatness of their business and the importance of their industry. And here was our
Yep.
latest earnings call. And never do you find out, what do you do on a weekend? Or, what sports teams do you follow? Or do you have any hobbies outside of, just give me a little bit of humanity. Because that's ultimately what's going to make you a well-rounded leader on all of those digital platforms we talked about earlier.
Oh yeah, for sure. What when if you're on the comms team or the social media team, what level of vulnerability should you encourage your leader to go to? Because so especially at social's great, but sometimes we miss that, like, oh wait a minute, I just went way too far. So what level of vulnerability do you recommend leaders use on those kind of areas?
Yeah, I mean, and the answer is going to be, obviously it depends on the person's personality and
Yeah.
even the culture, the subculture of the company itself. Some companies are obviously much more progressive and sort of bleeding edge and willing to sort of speak to their core audience, and it's okay if others don't get it. Other companies, what they're selling is really to a general population, a gen pop consumer, so they really have to be kind of approachable by everybody. Maybe you're a little bit more conservative than publicly. So it definitely depends on the industry, the company, and then that just individual leader. But I think you brought up AI earlier, and I think that it's a really interesting time because while there's so much excitement around AI, and I mean, I use it every day. Like, it's a
Yep.
fantastic tool, and we're just getting started, right? I think it's actually going to be a really good filtering mechanism for executive communications, because
Oh.
those that rely too heavily on things like ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever your platform of choice is, and don't really add that human layer, edit and sort of refine and nuance to make sure that it actually sounds like you. They can identify it a mile away.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, what was I? My kids are, my oldest 24, 22, 20, 16, and 10. So my 20-year-old works with me and speaks with people. And so we're always kind of dive in, and we were doing some research, and it's astounding. The percentage of Gen Z that, already use it, extremely functional. What are you seeing, especially with some of the companies you've worked with, some of the companies you worked at? Do you think it's a generational thing? Do you think it's across the board? Do you think one generation will, learn it? All I know is I typically try to say please and thank you, because if, the robots are going to control everything, I just want them to know I was very kind.
I love that. I love that. You're already building relationship. That's
Yeah,
great.
right. Got to connect. Got to speak with the chat bot.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was talking to a friend a couple weeks ago, and we were sort of recollecting that film that came out probably a decade ago. I'm sure you remember, called Her, with Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and Scarlett Johansson, which, as we know, then Scarlett Johansson's voice, that kind of kept going with OpenAI. But there are definitely moments when I sort of feel like I'm becoming friends with with my AI platform, and
You know me
I'm
so
not
well.
really. Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But no, I think the way that I use it a lot for kind of a second set of eyes, like almost like an editor.
Yep.
Um, I tend to write things myself first and like use it as a polish after. And then I use it a lot for research. It's a great research tool. I mean, personally and professionally. So I love it for that. I have also seen some fun use cases that I could see being helpful for both myself and clients, where you can upload massive PDFs and you can say, right, just distill this down to like 5 to 10 bullets. But I've also seen the use case, and I believe it was Gemini, Google's product, where you could, and you'll appreciate this, you could upload. I did a test with this as a 19-page PDF, and it was I just did a fun one, like, what's the history of Ireland? I have friends who are Irish, and I was like, okay, let's just do this.
Uh-huh.
And so I uploaded it and I said, make it into, it's like an audio format. It has like a button for that. And it turned it into a podcast with a man and a woman's voice talking back and forth. I know. And it was like a 22-minute podcast, and it did such a good job.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So I definitely think distilling long form information and getting just the synthesized version, kind of the, if you will, the 90s kid in me will come out, like the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah.
That is a really useful component of the research capabilities of AI.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Going back to the podcasting for a second, do you, depending on company size or gifting, do you highly recommend CEOs, presidents, that kind of area, be podcasting or finding somebody in their company to be leading a podcast for their company? I would love to know what you think about that.
I do. I mean, at the last company I was at, Qualcomm, we had a podcast, as you were mentioning earlier, like a Qualcomm run corporate podcast, and it was public. So we would have some of our senior engineers and certainly some of our C-suite join that from time to time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and again, to your point, like definitely a great way for both, customers and the public, and frankly, often candidates. I would hear a lot of
Hmm.
candidates say that one of the ways they prepped for interviews was by listening to our Qualcomm podcast.
Ah.
So there's a whole HR play there, that not my wheelhouse, but I think that's a huge
Yep.
tool for them to explore. But also employees, current employees would listen to it and get, again, access. When you're at a 40, 50,000 person company, many people would never have a conversation with a C-suite member, and you get to actually hear them talk in a more more
Yep.
conversational, casual tone. So I think it's a great idea. If you're at a company where they're not quite set up, or maybe resourced to have their own podcast, I think joining like this as a guest on key podcasts that speak to your core audiences
Mm.
is a great way to humanize the brand and to build your own reputation as a thought leader. And again, a great complement to some of the written word channels that we're so used to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when it comes to some of the social platforms, then do you recommend? I mean, it seems like most, corporate leaders are on LinkedIn. Is that like just a no brainer? Boy, hey, if you're a corporate leader, you've got to have some type of presence there.
I do. I think LinkedIn's the right place to start. I think that if that gets to be, you feel like you've exhausted that audience and that platform, and you want to sort of expand, then maybe you can think through, again, depending on your industry, depending on your personality, right? Is it, are you more of a lifestyle business where Instagram makes a ton of sense, or even TikTok? Perhaps other platforms are more appropriate for other industries, but, kind of gauging what is maybe your second platform after
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I just think a lot of the decision makers and folks that are probably your existing or potential customers. They're there, they're spending time. And historically, LinkedIn has had a much longer time on site. Now TikTok, I think, has killed that. But people have more of a lean back mentality in LinkedIn, meaning they're willing to kind of read and digest and watch video. Whereas in the past, some of the other social platforms that people wouldn't spend that kind of time on a
Right.
post.
Right.
So I think you get a little bit more attention there, and the right kind of attention.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost, it's like sometimes I almost feel like LinkedIn, everyone's so nice, like you put up your article, your business thoughts, everyone's like, oh, congratulations. Yeah. I've thought about that perspective as well. And then you might do it on so many other platforms and people are like screaming at each other. And, I'm like, oh, what is happening right now?
I know. I agree. I agree. And what I will say though is, a mistake that I see some leaders, and again, I understand it. I'm not mad at it, but a mistake I've seen them make, especially on places like LinkedIn, is that they back away step by step by step from actually being involved in what's going out on their behalf. And
Oh,
so I think we can tell. I mean, again, people are smart, right? Especially if you followed that person for a little while, or you kind of know what they sound like in other avenues. Um, you, it then it kind of starts to smack a bit of just PR and kind of pushing a press release, and it doesn't really engage the audience or humanize that leader. And so you start to kind of scratch your head and go, what are we really doing here?
wow. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, you're like, okay, your team has written this. Talk to us for a second about, and I apologize, I didn't include this in the questions, but I hear this from leaders from time to time, and I've thought it. What about the trolls? Like, do I engage with? I mean, there's nothing better, I think, sometimes than seeing, some folks on, like I had Nancy Duarte on the podcast last year. Nancy, I mean, just right, like, I mean, holy cow, I'm like, shaking. I'm so nervous. I'm like, it's Nancy Duarte, and then to see her comment on something, I was like, is that really her? Is that her people? Didn't matter. It was Nancy Duarte. So talk to us about how important it is, for leaders to actually engage in that. And then, what happens when the trolls come? Should they engage? I just found out not too long ago, there's a whole psychology behind just messing with the trolls because it will drive your engagement even more. I'm like,
Mhm. Yeah.
it's just insane.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe the advice I'm gonna give, maybe it flies in the face of driving. If your pure goal is to drive engagement, it may fly in the face of that. But I don't think that the digital spaces in this situation are that much different than um, in real life, right? I mean, if
Mm.
someone is trying to be antagonistic, they're just trying to get into a fight, right?
Yep. Yep.
Or they're spewing something. You'll see comments that have nothing to do with the post, right? They're
Right.
just totally off topic. Just like probably our parents taught us back in the day, in the playground, like just walk away, ignore it. Just it's not worth it. No good is going to come out of that conversation. And in many cases, unfortunately, that person just kind of wants to stir it up. And so don't give them any fuel for that. That's my advice there. Ignore. Um, and then, but I think at a macro level, like engaging with legitimate comments and questions is the name of the game. I mean, that shows that you're not just using it as a PR tool. You're not just pushing out content and then dropping the mic and walking away.
Yep.
You're actually looking at it and like, oh, what's going to happen? What, an hour later or the next day. And you're not only just trying to be of service to your following and really, again, thank them and respond, which they're going to love, but you also might glean some good information. Like I mentioned earlier, social can really be a listening tool. You can start to see, we saw this at Qualcomm, you can start to see conversations split off that you're not a part of. And those are meaningful conversations that could actually be accretive to the business.
Right. Whew. So as we kind of round the corner and finish up the conversation, when you think about communicating digitally, especially for senior leaders, there's the internal aspect of it, the external aspect of it. Are there some strategies to how they differ? Are there some things that just, a couple of nuggets to just to remember as we kind of close? I mean, you've given us so much good wisdom right now, but so far, but are there a couple of nuggets as we kind of close up to think about, okay, as I communicate internally, okay, I got to remember these things, and then externally, got to do these things.
Yeah, I think again, almost like I was saying with B2B and B2C sort of thinking, I think 20 years ago, even 15 years ago, I believe that what we might have said internally versus externally was very bifurcated. And I just think that's another, in my opinion, a beautiful component of digital. It's like it's sort of meshed. Our lives are sort of much messier, but also maybe more integrated as well. And so a lot of the things that a leader might share at an all hands meeting or in maybe like quarterly emails, team huddles, certainly there's material information that's non-public. You of course would want to talk about that publicly for all the obvious reasons. And certainly we don't want to get into any conversations about, competition and any of that. But again, in many cases, in most large groups internally, you wouldn't want to have that kind of dialogue either. So more and more what you say at, say, an all hands meeting with your employee base, or maybe in like a Friday email, can be very similar to what you say publicly, because it's going to be inspirational. It's going to be sort of, it's going to be summarizing perhaps like a big win or a notable moment in time, a product launch. And guess what? Your employees are all on those platforms. So they're seeing it externally and hearing it internally. And then you're illustrating transparency, that you're sort of a fluid leader that isn't one person in-house, somebody else out of house. You're you.
Yep. Oh, I love that. And this is why I love that there are leaders like you that exist, because there are so many conversations I've had with people, leaders who say, I can never do a podcast. My voice doesn't matter. And they have all these excuses, and I'm like, no, that's just not the case at all. Your voice does matter. And that's what I love that you provide, especially for leaders to go, okay, hey, especially at a different level. I remember when I first got on social and it was just sort of like, oh yeah, here's what I had for dinner and here's what I have. Now I'm actively trying to tell the story that every single human being has a decision to make. You can communicate in a healthy way, you can communicate in an unhealthy way. And each have grave, there's plus sides to both of them, downsides. And so every post, I'm always thinking through, trying to be strategic, trying to point people to speak with people and not at them. And so that's just what I love. Let me ask you one last question, just because you're here and I got you, and I'll do it quickly. But I try to ask this to as many folks who left the corporate world, who started out, went on their own, entrepreneurs. Uh, is it the best decision you ever made? Are there things you miss about the corporate world? Do you love being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, you're getting me early in the game because I just launched my business this year, so
Okay.
I've
All
still
right.
got a lot to learn. But so far, I think that I have realized I was always, you've heard that term entrepreneur, I'm
Yep.
sure.
Yep.
I was always sort of entrepreneurial in spirit, and
Yep.
I was a builder. I was good at identifying patterns, maybe identifying opportunities or gaps, and then going, hey, could we build a different way to do this?
Yep.
I did that a lot inside of the companies where I worked, and I just didn't really recognize it or brand it as
Yep.
entrepreneurial back then. So I find that I kind of have already a bit of a skill set from all those years. I'm just now doing it for myself.
Oh, I love that. I love it. Okay, rapid fire questions. We're listeners, we're building this online communication library where you can go and get some great ideas for different resources. So, Jess, do you have a favorite speaker? Is there someone that every time you listen to them, they just check all the boxes? Can't wait to hear them another time. Can't wait to send that talk to somebody. Is there somebody that you'd highly recommend?
Yes, I love Scott Galloway. I feel like I've been talking about him for so long, and people are probably tired of me referencing him. But are you familiar? Have you heard that name
Oh yeah.
before? Okay, yeah. So for those that maybe just don't know, he's a NYU professor, marketer, entrepreneur, economics leader, and he's just super funny, really smart. A little bit raunchy at times, but
Love it.
he's got, yeah, he's got I think 3 podcasts now. One of which is with Kara Swisher, who's kind of an infamous tech journalist. called Pivot. And I just learned so much from him. And I think he's just really funny and also very heartfelt at times. So love Scott Galloway. On social, I mean, I think Sarah Blakely does a great job on Instagram. She's the founder of Spanx. And
Yeah.
yeah, she's again, talk about being a human, full, like 360 leader. She's great. I also love Adam Grant. I feel
Oh
like
yeah.
he's just so thoughtful and wise. He's more of an introvert and he like totally embraces the introvert in him. And, but he's also very data driven and has like great case studies. So I learn a lot from Adam Grant.
It's brilliant. If you're well, we already talked about this. You are a podcast listener. So is there a guilty pleasure or development one that you're just like, ooh, everyone's got to listen to this. You'll gain so much from it.
I listened to Diary of a CEO.
Yeah.
That I think he does a really good job and brings great people on there to be interviewed. And it's all different industries and different topics. And I sort of love, the British accents. Hard to not love that.
I know. He's a good looking
Um,
chap. I'm like, okay.
I know. I always wish that I had that kind of accent. It's beautiful. And then I listened to, there's one called Honestly by Barry Weiss, and she's a former New York Times journalist. And it has elements that are political, but elements that are just about big macro, just societal issues. And again, she's super smart, well-researched, brings on amazing guests, and really does a good job of representing, I think, kind of the full spectrum
Yeah.
of opinions, which I think I got that from my dad, sort of like lean into maybe differences of opinion and be a good listener
Yep.
because you might learn
Ooh.
something. And she does a great job of that.
Wow. That's a whole podcast on its own right there. That's brilliant. And then is there a book, I know this is tough, but is there a book that, you just say, hey, leader, you gotta read this one.
Yeah. So it's actually on my shelf back here. And I swear I didn't put it there just for the video. So I really, and I need to read it again, but I got so much out of the book Principles by Ray Dalio. So I think many other podcasters actually reference elements of Principles, but it's a pretty deep, like heady read. You have to, again, highlight it and kind of go back and look at it again.
Yep.
But I feel like talking about building frameworks and making decisions in thoughtful, sort of intellectual ways that are outcome based. There's almost no better book than that one.
I love it. Well, we'll be adding those. And to our listeners, make sure that you go and check out that library. Okay, where do we send people to find out more about you online, connect with you, find out all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So really two places. My website is Copilot Communications. And that's where you can find out a bit more about my business, a little bio of me, and obviously reach out to contact me if you want to learn more about working together. And then if you just want to sort of follow my own content and narrative platform, what I share in the world, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and that's Jessica K. Jensen.
Well, oh my goodness. I love talking with other people who love communication. You are a very, very good communicator. Thank you so much for just opening up your vault of wisdom and sharing. We'll make sure we put all of this stuff in our email and our Facebook group, and just can't thank you enough for your time today.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Thank you for listening to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. Thank you for leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And thank you for every like and every comment. Every single time you cut and copy a link and send it to a coworker or a friend, it absolutely means the world, and it helps each other transform our communication skills. Lastly, don't forget about a great resource that's available to you: our communication skills library. At the end of every episode, we ask each guest their favorite speaker, their favorite podcast, their favorite book, and we've compiled all of those resources together to give you an amazing library to continue your growth and development. Thank you again for being a listener and for being a part of the Speak with People community.